Hey everybody, Destalker here. I was actually talking on Twitter a while back with one of the guys I follow, and somehow we got on a discussion about really bad mechanics, and I thought I'd touch on something that's actually kind of funny in a way, but in a way it's also a little sad, and that is when I was racing, there was a lot of guys who were absolutely incredibly good racers and were the worst mechanics you ever met in your entire life. Now, on the upper level of racing, it's usually not a big deal, because usually if you're racing for a factory team or a well-supported team, you have a mechanic. But when you're starting off, unless you can convince a friend of yours to come out and help you, you're your own mechanic. And you know, you're only going to be as good as you can ride and your mechanic can tune your bike. Well, this all came about because I've seen some pretty unbelievably stupid things being done on motorcycles over the years, and I thought I'd tell you a little bit about them. Now, some of these are GP bike racer related, but some of them are actually things I saw in some of the other classes. A good friend of mine who was a GP racer, he had a friend who raced 600 production, which a lot of people used as a starting class to start off racing. And production was production, so basically you'd have to use, you know, production-based tires. You restricted as to engine modifications. You could only do, you know, things basically related to safety, like add a steering dampener, and you know, a few things like, you know, safety wiring stuff. So there wasn't really, a lot of these guys didn't think they had to do a lot of maintenance. Well, the one guy, you know, he was a pretty fast guy, but he had to change his brake pads because they were on his bike, they were worn out. They were actually worn out down to the metal. So he popped in a new set of pads and he went out and went out for his first lap, and about halfway through the second lap he ended up crashing into a bunch of hay bales because he had a brake failure. And when the bike came back into the pits, we were all sort of like trying to figure out what the heck happened. He put new brake pads in, and generally if you screw up something with the brakes, it's going to show up in the first corner. A lot of people, when they do work in the brake, they forget to pump the brake lever up to, you know, to reset the pistons in the caliper back against the pads, so you actually will have brakes the first time you pull the lever. That's the most common thing to do, but this was weird. He got a bunch of laps in before it happened, or a bunch of corners in before it happened. So we get the bike back in and take all the hay that's embedded in all different parts of the bike out, and we take a look, and this guy had managed to install the brake pads backwards. So he actually had the metal sides in with the pad side facing up against the pistons. And we were all just sort of like, you gotta be kidding me. Now, part of it is the guy, not a mechanic, but it was just like really, really, really bad. And we were just sort of shocked that he could actually do that sort of thing. But you know, he was a good guy, and he took a lot of ribbing over that. Like we went around the rest of the year. Every time we walked into came into a new track, or we walked into a bike shop, we'd ask the mechanic if he had a card, and we were all collecting these cards from all over the North America, and whenever we saw this guy on a racetrack, we'd always leave one on his bike, or 10 or 100, and he took it in good humor. And you know, it was just one of those kind of weird things you don't really expect. Another thing that happened was we had a guy who actually was a really, really fast 250 racer, and he generally had the shop service his bike every weekend. So he would take his bike to the bike shop. He had lots of money, and he would take the bike in during the week, and they would service it, and he'd pick it up and take it to the racetrack, and he literally would do nothing. He would just drive it as it was, and he was like scaldingly fast. And my engine builder, who was working on other guy's bikes, asked me to go see if I could help this guy out because he was having a problem with his bike and he just couldn't deal with him anymore. And I went like, what are you talking about? And he goes like, you'll see. So my bike had already been serviced for the day, and I basically had even had my dinner. So I'm just lounging around, taking it easy, and walk over to see what he's up to. And I walk up and I'm watching, and he's got this great big wrench on the rear wheel nut on the bike, and he's hitting it with this god-awful big hammer. And I'm going like, what the heck are you doing? And he goes, it's seized. I'm trying to get it off. And of course, this is on the other side of the bike. So I'm walking around the bike, and I said, it would actually come off if you would actually turn the nut the other way. He actually had tried to tighten the nut, and when that wasn't working, he actually started to hit it with a hammer to try to tighten it even harder, thinking he was actually loosening it. And apparently he had never heard of, tighty righty lefty loosey. And I was going, oh my god. So basically I look, and half the nuts on his bike were rounded off because he had done this to more than one bolt. And he had a cylinder half off, and the problem was he actually had to replace a piston because and luckily he had all the parts. So I basically put him in charge of holding the flashlight, and I replaced the piston and all the parts on his bike and tried to show him a few things. But this guy was clueless. Like he just could not absorb anything. Like even something simple as like putting a rag in the covering the crankshaft so you didn't drop anything down in there while you had that exposed. He couldn't understand what that was for. And it was just absolutely scary that this guy was trying to work on his bikes. Eventually what happened was he hired a full-time mechanic to actually work on his bike so he could focus on racing. But the sad part about it was I did all the work on his bike, and didn't the guy bloody well beat me that race? Oh well.